everyone. I hope you enjoyed your coffee break and welcome back. So this is our third panel. This is Black Sea region at the boiling point, and it will touch on Moldova, Romania, Turkey, Bulgaria, and the challenges that the entire region is facing. So I'd like to very quickly introduce our panel: Alexandru, Flenchea, Doru, Costea, Simona, Cojocaru, Vessela, Tcherneva, Thomas, Mayr-Harting, and Moderator Oana, Popescu-Zamfir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. A pleasure to be hosting this discussion, especially since I'm standing between you and lunch. I wish I didn't have to do it under these circumstances, though. But without wasting any more of your time, let us get straight to the point. And the point is, and I would start with you, Mrs. Simona Cojocaru. You are State Secretary in the Romanian Ministry of Defense. Romania has been calling for more attention to the Black Sea region, to the southern eastern flank of NATO, if I can say so, for a long time now, precisely for circumstances such as these that we are living these days. And my two questions to you would be, are you satisfied with the NATO response so far? Are we where we should have been perhaps years back? Or are we at least on the right path? And then secondly, what can we do, the literal states, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, NATO members, as well as non-NATO members?
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be in Belgrade, attending the Belgrade Security Conference for the first time. What a great audience here. I salute the distinguished panelists, and I would like to start by saying that the old assumptions on peace are not as certain as they are a couple of years ago. Romania was amongst the strongest advocates of increasing NATO's European Union positions on the regional level, on the Black Sea region. And I would like to say also that history seemed unchallengeable at some point, but now the era of innocence, I think it's over in relation with Russian Federation. So, yes, we are satisfied. We had the important decisions, the Big Bang decisions, if you like, in NATO summit in Madrid last June. And now the presence on the eastern flank at the Black Sea. I have seen some images from MK or Mihail Cogălnicianu Air Base in Romania. We are talking now about a multi-dimensional, multinational support, and you have seen all the speed, scale, and scope of the allied and also the bilateral level deployments in Romania in the aftermath of 24th of February. For the first time in modern history of the alliance, NATO deployed the Spearhead Force very, very quickly in 3 days on the shore of the Black Sea, starting with the end of February. You have also seen such an important signs of solidarity and unity at the NATO and EU level in relation with what is happening with the war of aggression in Ukraine. Yes, we are on the right path. We have witnessed important decisions at the Allied and also at the EU level, unprecedented, and we are very much continuing to implement. And these are not big words, ladies and gentlemen. This is about doing our homework as allies, and with littoral states, as you mentioned.
How are we doing our homework?
We are putting a lot of effort in
More
developing...
concretely, what kind of effort?
Money. For instance, Romania is one of the countries that is increasing the defense budget to 2.5% of GDP starting with 2023.
Some would say that that comes out of a relatively small budget. So is that enough? Can we actually make a significant
If you are asking me, working in the defense policy, I would say it is not enough. I mean, it's absolutely clear. But 2.5% makes Romania one of the successful stories within the alliance. Yesterday, our Prime Minister was in Brussels meeting with Secretary General Stoltenberg, with President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and they talked about the Black Sea and about Romania's commitment to be nowadays a mature, a committed ally to the security of the alliance, to the security of Europe and Euro-Atlantic as a whole. So we are doing a lot. We are investing. You know that after Crimea, 2014, Romania set up on national territory, like other countries on the eastern flank, command and control structure, multinational brigade, multinational division, HQ, multinational corps. Now we are setting up with France as the lead nation a battle group alongside with the new 4 ones decided by our leaders earlier this year in Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria, adding, complementing the existing 4 ones in Baltic states and Poland. So we are translating to what we are calling a unitary forward defense on the eastern flank, and we are investing a lot in our air bases, in our capabilities, together with our strategic partners and NATO allies.
Thank you very much. Vessela, I will turn to you to complement what's just been said, because you have worked both for government recently, and then you also have the kind of the critical look from the think tank perspective. Unlike Poland and the Baltics, which have invested significantly and do have their own capacity, very often the answer that I get from the Romanian side when asked how are we boosting our capacities on the southern flank, the answer is we're getting more NATO troops, we're getting more allied troops, more allied equipment. Does that mean that we as a region are not doing enough, the literal states, and can we do more?
If you allow me, I will start by saying that the region is actually, to me, a very hard one to describe, or even a non-existent. I am not convinced that the title of this session is actually true, that there is a Black Sea region. It has to do with the complexity of the countries around the Black Sea. But this is not the Baltics, right? I mean, we have to be quite clear about that. And we can delve into the reasons why this is so. But the fact is that there are disparities in the military capabilities of the countries around. There are disparities in their risk assessments. There are totally different worldviews if you take other parts of the non-NATO parts of the Black Sea. So, you know, talking about the Black Sea region as such, I think is a big challenge. Having said that, I think there are clearly things that the littoral countries can do. Obviously, spending more on defense, but I think most of all, working together. And I would say that this coalition on the eastern flank is something that we should probably keep up and develop more than before. Joint air policing, maritime surveillance, sharing intelligence on that end, but also why not common maritime guards and so on. I would say security, however, is when you talk about the Black Sea or parts of the Black Sea, security does not necessarily only have to do with hard power. It has to do clearly with the humanitarian aspect of this crisis. Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova have received massive wave of refugees. It is not impossible that we see actually an even bigger one coming onto us as we go forward. And while the humanitarian aspect is very important, I think there is also a security aspect to this.
But can I just ask you, because you always speak about these countries together, what are the perspectives for actual coordination and cooperation? Are we able to cooperate? Because I still remember the Romanian initiative of a Black Sea flotilla a few years back, which fell through, unfortunately, because of opposition from Bulgaria and Turkey. What stops us from cooperating, and can we hope this is going to improve?
I am not going to go into the flotilla question because it will be a separate
it's just
discussion.
an example.
But I think what can bring us together are clearly common threats. So nothing brings us together in this region better than threats. But one thing that could also keep us together is common strategic infrastructure. And we saw with the energy crisis, but now also with the military threat, that we don't have enough critical infrastructure together, that we cannot we don't have that many choices. If the Black Sea, for some reason, stops being, accessible from the Mediterranean, what do we do with our critical resources? So we need to have a much better, I think, south-north infrastructure, both in terms of energy resources, but also in terms of military mobility and so on. And I think most of all, we will have to work on this probably politically within the EU context. And if you allow me to mention the EU here for the first time in this panel, I think the EU unity and in general having the countries from the so-called eastern flank get their act together in terms of their political stamina, stability, but also their willingness to take initiative within the EU, also in its defense bit, are probably going to take us further than we are currently.
Thank you very much. And I will get back to the EU a little bit later, but I'm moving back to NATO for a bit to focus a little on Turkey. And Ambassador Costea, you have good knowledge of the Middle East in general and the Near Eastern region. Turkey has become a player that's harder and harder to understand sometimes. How do you assess the role of Turkey? Because eventually, when it comes strictly to the Black Sea, it is Turkey that has been able to broker the grain deal that allows Ukraine to export its agricultural produce. It is Turkey that's trying to broker negotiations. It is Turkey that we all look to as the actual opponent, maritime opponent of Russia around the Black Sea. So my question is, what is Turkey in this? Is it a predictable NATO ally? Is it a lone rider playing its own game and we need to learn how to deal with it? What can we expect?
Thank you very much for your question. I wish you could have found a more complex one. This is so simple. Turkey's role in this whole file is at least as complex as the very issue of the Black Sea region, as was just mentioned by our colleague. Is there a Black Sea region or not? Is there a Turkey that is an ally, reliable in NATO, or what it is? So you put them together. It is not an artificial thinking, I'm afraid. It is just triggered by the reality. By realities, plural. One reality is that this region, let's agree for a moment that we are talking about a region, used to be, as somebody said some almost 20 years ago, the Bermuda Triangle of the Western strategic thinking. Because the region borders strategic regions and belongs to none. It falls, among them. So somehow it managed to elude any definition. However, Mr. Putin, among very many unintended consequences of his actions, now he's facing another one. An area which gains personality, because it is there. It is in NATO concept, as Secretary of State said, and it is in the naval concept of Russia, as we know in the document that was published 1 month after the Madrid NATO document. Where comes Turkey here? Well, if you look at the whole history, it is actually Turkey who had, at one moment, for about 200 years, turned the sea into a Turkish lake. Then, all of a sudden, it was turned to a sort of a condominium, some say. And now there are people who think that this is where we are going. because it's Turkey and Russia, Turkey and Russia. No, why? Turkey has the key to the Montreux Convention. But Turkey has also, we need to understand why Turkey is doing what it's doing. We need to take a small step behind and look at the becoming of new Turkey, what happened to it. And very, very briefly, I'm just sketching out things. One is that everybody knows the fallout of First World War and what happened to the Ottoman Empire. Well, it disappeared, but it did not disappear from the mentality. It did not disappear from the memory of the people in the area, neither in Turkey proper nor around Turkey. You mentioned Middle East. One of the scares of the Levant is Turkey coming back. It used to be there, and now it's coming back. Look at Syria, and there you are. Another very sketchy thing. The Turkish sources and our partners in the New Strategy Center tell us, focus on compartmentalization of foreign policy. Slicing. This is economy, energy with Russia. This is a contradiction with Russia in Syria, and so on and so forth. So this allows them to promote a very flexible and sometimes creative political action.
Are they doing the same with respect to NATO? So they're not necessarily internalizing every rule and value as the others do, but give their own interpretation?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is no, but, because they are not doing it bluntly, and they are actually very creatively sometimes, and sometimes annoyingly, promoting their own interests in front of any other ones. The last example is the Swedish and Finnish accession, and we know 2 days ago what happened. The point is that one prominent Turkish analyst said about that this is because they want something. They are ready to bargain. So they are aiming at getting something in return. It is not unseen. This is the essence of diplomacy, to bargain, to gain something in return. The point is that Turkey has a card it thinks, and particularly President Erdogan, thinks he may play and win.
And can I just kind of bring this first round of questions to you to an end by asking you, if you were to oversimplify and just give a yes or no answer to the question, we are going to need Turkey for energy diversification, for maritime trade routes, for dealing with Russia more widely. Will we be able to count on Turkey, or should we see Turkey as more of an obstacle?
We must put Turkey in our equations, no matter what we want to do with the area. Otherwise, or to put it otherwise, we cannot ignore Turkey at our own peril.
And we cannot take it for granted.
And we need to better understand what it wants. And Turkey needs to better understand what we want of Turkey, because I'm afraid, and I'm very, this is my very personal view, that sometimes we don't know what we expect from Turkey.
Thank you very much. I will move outside of the NATO framework now to Moldova and ask Alexandru Flenchea how you see so far it's the perspective from within NATO, so from the relative comfort and safety of the NATO security umbrella. How has the war affected Moldova, and what do you see in the short and medium run even, not necessarily in the long run? How do you see the options for Moldova to increase its security, both in a very hard security kind of way, meaning your country has neutrality in its constitution. Is this something that's going to be rediscussed, renegotiated, but also in terms of energy dependence on Russia? And are there solutions beyond this winter?
Oh, there's actually two very complex questions that I could keep talking on for hours and hours and hours. I'll try to be very brief. Yes, indeed, Moldova is a neutral country that's enshrined in our constitution. However, unless this war totally escalates and changes the world irreversibly, what we are going to have after the war will be a new security architecture in Europe. And part of that new security architecture will be some security arrangements for the Black Sea region, at least for the north and northwestern part of the Black Sea. And that would have to include not only Ukraine, but also Moldova. And if, for some reason, such separate security arrangements for Ukraine and Moldova are not created, then Moldova must, and it's not a should or could, it's a must, initiate discussions, consultations with partners, and create security arrangements for itself and in a broader geographical sense for Ukraine. Because even right now, but also more so after the war, Moldova will be in between Ukraine, which is just like Moldova, you candidate, but also has a stated goal of joining NATO. And then west of Moldova, our immediate neighbor Romania, also EU and NATO member state. And well, Moldova will have to, and it must already now, initiate consultations and discussions to create a vision of security agreements and security arrangements for itself, for its own future. And we have two countries, one current NATO member and one future NATO member state. So whether or not that will be compatible with neutrality, time will show. But neutrality, just like NATO, is not an end in itself, right? It's one of the possible options to ensure security.
Has that discussion started in Chisinau? Is this something that's being acknowledged and discussed? And are there proposals on the table, or is this a process that's just starting?
There is something that will have to be started. I think people and politicians are only in the reflection phase, also pretty much is being affected by the war and the war thinking and concerns about the possible spillover effect. So I have to admit politicians, decision makers are more focused on immediate future goals and immediate future objectives as opposed to longer term perspective, which I think so far it's only the civil society that is trying to look more in the longer term.
And probably one of the pressing issues that everybody's focused on is energy, because essentially for Moldova right now, energy availability and its cost are the determining factors for how this winter is going to be, how you're going to go through the winter. Is there any discussion on how Moldova is likely to increase its energy independence from Russia?
Well, if anyone is asking themselves how does weaponization of energy by Russia work, Moldova is a great example to illustrate that. It happens so that about 90% of our electricity generation is located in Transnistria and effectively owned by Russia. And also it happens that I stress that all of Moldova's energy sector is based on natural gas, whether it's Gazprom or other sources, but it's natural gas and it's been Gazprom so far. And just to illustrate to you, natural gas bills, the tariffs, in the past 12 months, from October last year to October this year, have increased by 500%. You heard it right, by 6 times. And we're talking about the poorest nation in Europe. And the reason I'm talking about poverty is that poverty is best allied to manipulation and political corruption. So Russia does not necessarily need to roll tanks into Moldova to have Moldova under control. No. it can instrumentalize and use poverty and use energy weaponization to have Moldova destabilized. Because the so-called pro-Russian parties in Moldova don't really have broad support. They only have support of the poor people who are easy to manipulate and corrupt. How do we fix that? Integration, integration, integration. And I'm not talking about political and economic only, because that's underway. I'm talking about infrastructure and interconnections. I think this year and this war has shown to us that energy resources in general, are not necessarily in short supply. There is no necessarily deficit of resources. What we're lacking is transport infrastructure. There's gas available, but there's no infrastructure available to supply it in the needed quantities where it's needed most, Moldova in this case. So this is what has to be addressed right now, medium-term future, and longer-term future. And one last point here. Transnistria, because I said this is where most of the energy infrastructure is located. Russia's influence and the leverages in Transnistria have two pillars. Is the Russian troops in Transnistria and the free Russian gas. And you take away one of these two elements and the whole construct collapses. And keep that in mind, keep that in mind. It also happens that Transnistria's energy infrastructure is not separate from the rest of the world. It's fully integrated into Moldova's and Ukraine's energy infrastructure. So if the supplier were to be replaced, guess what happens and what consequences would that have politically and security-wise on Transnistria and Moldova as a whole, and the Black Sea region in the broader sense?
Exactly, and let me use that to transition precisely to frozen conflicts in the Black Sea region, Transnistria included. What we have now for sure is the breakdown of the 5+2 negotiation format. I don't know if at this point there is anything that we can replace it with. And so I will ask you, Mr. Mayr-Harting, you have been dealing with this. Everybody at this point, I believe, agrees the OSCE itself is not necessarily in a position to play much of a role under these circumstances. The 5+2 format is very unlikely to be revived. So on the spectrum between we have a crisis, as long as we deal with the crisis collectively with the Russian war on Ukraine, that is where we will stop, because we don't want to think in the longer term. And then at the other end of the spectrum, this could actually provide the opportunity to overhaul the entire security architecture around the Black Sea and even solve existing frozen conflicts. Where do you think we are at this point?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Obviously, what I'm saying is in my personal capacity, but I will, if I may, start at the most regional end of your question, which is basically to say also, with a view to the title, that whatever the problems are and how concerning the situation might be, Transnistria right now is not at a boiling point. And that, I think, is due to two factors. The first, of course, the incredible resilience of the Ukrainian armed forces, because had the Russian forces reached Odessa, as some Russian military leaders announced as a war goal, then of course the situation would be dramatically different. Odessa is only 70 kilometers from the Moldovan borders. A refugee can practically walk there. So I mean that situation would have been fundamentally different. But the other factor, and this is perhaps nonetheless an element to be added to what you said, is that the sides in this Transnistrian context, that is to say the authorities in Chisinau and the de facto authorities in Tiraspol, have established and are continuing to maintain a dialogue on all sorts of number of issues. And precisely for the reasons that Mr. Flenchea just mentioned, the Transnistrian local elites are affected by some of the phenomenon exactly in the same way as Moldovan society. And they have certain shared interests which are not identical with broader Russian interests. And so you have this dialogue which has been ongoing, which focuses, amongst other things, on energy. And this dialogue is OSCE facilitated. So in fact, as a sort of a slight rectification of what you said, the OSCE is in fact playing a relatively useful role right now in keeping the situation there more stable than it would otherwise be. Now, when you come to the 5+2 format, which you mentioned, I mean, this, of course, in the overall context of European security arrangements, and more specifically, even in the context of the OSCE, has been something rather unique in the past. As you know, it's the only format in which there was some sort of interaction, moderately constructive, but even so, even with the Russian Federation. I mean, the Russian Federation has maintained de facto the status quo in Transnistria, but you have had this process, this very unusual process, where there were 3 mediators, the OSCE, Russia, Ukraine, and 2 observers, the European Union and the United States. Now, obviously, you're right to say that under the given circumstances, a process where Russia, which is leading a war of aggression against Ukraine, sits together with Ukraine in a mediation process as co-mediators, is out of the question. So this process right now is frozen. And that is, in fact, the term that everybody is using. I was in Kiev recently, and even the Ukrainian side says the process is frozen. Nobody knows for certain what will happen afterwards, and it may well be, even under these new security arrangements that Mr. Flenchea has mentioned, that you need some kind of structure which allows for some interaction between those participants who've been part of the 5+2 process until now.
Kiev is also saying that Transnistria might be part of the eventual Ukraine-Russia negotiations. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think essentially what counts is what the Republic of Moldova itself sees as the goals for its future. And as you know, we are operating on the basis of, at least that was what even all OSCE contracting parties, including participating states, including at the time even Russia, agreed to: sovereignty, territorial integrity within the Republic of Moldova's internationally recognized borders, with a special status for Transnistria. But what I wanted to say is there are 2 factors which are certainly important right now in this new constellation that we are seeing. The one, of course, is that the sort of logic of empire, the logic of spheres of influence, I think must clearly be overcome if we want to have a durable European security architecture. And the other, of course, is that the Republic of Moldova has made a choice for membership in the European Union. I mean, I dealt with this file before I worked for the OSCE Chair-in-Office within the structures of the European Union. And the European Union, in a quite dramatic decision, has accepted this choice in the sense that they're now negotiating with the Republic of Moldova, or will negotiate on membership. And if you sort of accept these new parameters, that the Republic of Moldova, and that of course includes Transnistria, because we recognize the Republic of Moldova in its internationally recognized borders, is moving towards membership in the European Union, and then you find a new sort of security structure which is no longer based on logics of spheres of influence and the like, then we will still need probably some sort of format of interaction, which may, as I said, also include all those who were in the 5+2 process, but under a very different geometry, under a very different international philosophy than what we've seen so far.
Well, let me be a little bit provocative and Vessela, turn to you and argue that one of the fundamental factors that's actually driven the Transnistrian separatist regime to cooperate with Chisinau rather than side with Russia in this conflict is that the EU has included Transnistria in the DCFTA, the free trade agreement signed with Moldova. And right now the leadership in Tiraspol is more interested in continuing their corrupt dealings, which benefit somehow from this, from trade with the EU, rather than be dragged into a war. So one of the things that we have in common in this region, which might qualify us to be a region, is higher levels of corruption than in other parts of Europe. Is it likely that on the softer side, not on the hard security side, we are going to be dealing with increased attempts by Russia to destabilize this region through these means, or do you think that Russia is going to be too weak to have any time and energy left for that?
Clearly, corruption has been one of the big channels for Russian influence in our part of Europe. And we have seen this. We have also seen that when severing the energy links with Russia, there was a lot of also domestic outcry, and political parties who have been, in a way, closer to Russia have also had a specific stance on Gazprom and so on. So all of that you can trace quite well and quite clearly. But because we're also in the Balkans, we have been saying here in the Balkans that it is not Nokia but corruption that's connecting people. I think corruption can also work in that way, as you described, that it's actually much more lucrative to stay within a certain trade realm rather than being dragged into a war. And I think this has helped also here in the Balkans on many occasions. But speaking about Russian influence, I think what we should really keep in mind when we talk about the common security threats and our strategies in how to react to them, I think this should be really our paying attention to the quality of the democracies in our countries and how resilient we are in general. And here comes, of course, the language of rule of law. I know that for the military experts, it's not that much of a common topic, but I think, frankly, the density of our institutions, how well are they equipped to cope with stress, with shocks from the outside, has a lot to do with our judicial systems, with our resilience, with our media, and I think there is, on the one hand, a bit of an awakening, I hope at least, in our publics as well for that fact. But I think also our allies further west have realized how important that is to really pay attention to media, to resilience in general, to the ability of our countries and societies to really resist malign influence.
And Simona, Cojocaru, do you feel, and I'm trying to sort of extract the overall conclusion of what we're discussing when it comes to non-NATO and non-EU members. Do you feel that there is a sea change in the way Europe, and I emphasize Europe, not the US, not the UK, because I think they were probably there already, but is Europe thinking of this region and of continental security differently? And is it serious about the EU accession perspective for Ukraine and Moldova? Because we are in the Balkans, and I think there's so much experience here of disillusionment with EU promises. Is this likely to happen to Ukraine and Moldova as well? Or this time it's different?
Yes. This time is different, absolutely. I'm very glad that you used the word sea change. I'm using all the time in relation with the Black Sea, you know, it's the same family. And we are also using the watershed moment in European security. Yes, this time around is different. We have seen an unprecedented mobilization at the European level in relation with granting the status of candidate countries for Republic of Moldova and Ukraine. I remember back in June the visit of the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in Kiev, and also the visit of Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany, and also Italy, France, and Romanian leaders in Kiev. And after this important visits in Kiev, we had that gigantic step forward. And right now, I think this is very much linked with the strategic future of the European Union at the end of the day. And I think we need workable policies and the united front towards achieving concrete steps on the path to enlargement for these countries. Black Sea is for sure not a sea of love and peace, like some defined this back in 2016 when we talked about the Black Sea flotilla. Yes, Romania was amongst the countries who very strongly, very vocally advocated the need to do more for the Black Sea, because at that time the Black Sea was getting warmer, hot, And now, indeed, is at the boiling point. We need to do more for our partners. It's important to increase their resilience, their defense capabilities. Look how important reversal of the foreign policy options in Europe took place. Germany increased the defense budget. Denmark.
But this is crisis management. This is a reaction to crisis. Is this likely to turn into structural change for the medium and long term?
Yes, this is the high time to do this.
Thank you very much. I will ask you the same question, Mr. Flenchea. Do you feel that this time it's different? Is there optimism in Moldova that you not just have an EU perspective, but you are moving in that direction? And given how long the process might take, is Moldova counting only on this process for diversification of energy, for more support and security cooperation? Or do you feel that cooperation on a bilateral level with partners like Romania, like Poland, like others, like Ukraine, might actually be the more immediate answer?
No, I don't think the two contradict each other. But also, is it different? Yes, everything is different this time, obviously. I mean, 2022 is different in so many areas, in every single respect. But also, for Moldovan and Moldovans, I think, and I couldn't underscore more how important it is, the support this upcoming winter. Because any future prospects, any future discussion, they all depend on whether or not Moldova, as a sovereign, independent nation, and as people, survive this winter energy and financially. I mean, again, I have to get back to poverty and weaponization of energy resources. But pretty soon, in about a month, Moldovans will start receiving bills, energy bills that will get to the point of average household revenues monthly, or even go above it. So obviously the government will do their best to compensate, but we're not talking about the level of compensation they apply in Romania or in Germany or in the Baltic states. So right now, this winter, Moldova is going to be a very fragile construct and country that needs support, because otherwise we're risking of collapsing the infrastructure and political institutions. So we survive the winter, and then I think the track will be positive.
In 2 minutes, I'll move to questions from the room. But Mr. Costea, very briefly, are we forgetting one important player here, and that is China? Isn't it likely that China will be interested in participating in Ukraine's reconstruction? Isn't it likely that China is just silently enjoying what Russia is doing and then waiting to reap the benefits, including in this region?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're moving to the next speaker.
I think we are somehow neglecting China, although it is very difficult to neglect 1.4 billion people and whatever China means. Yes, I'm certain that China eyes very hopefully the chance of reconstructing Ukraine. Let us remind the strategic partnership between China and Ukraine that was signed almost 10 years ago. There are a lot of interests. Time is not the place to list the shared interest between Ukraine and China, no matter who is running Ukraine. I don't think there are many questions on who is running China. Last but not least, the strategic interests, whether China is happy what's going on in order to come back later as the savior of the game, I think perhaps the Chinese interests looked that way. Now they are not very sure, because it may be the situation, the end situation is much worse than they had hoped. What I think we can be very sure about is that they don't like it. It is not something that China would have needed right now. Another conflict in an area of great interest, and don't forget that the Western us, we need China as bad as they need us. Sure.
Can I ask you for a very quick answer to one essential question that ties into the title of this security conference? And that is, to go back to what Vessela was saying, is it likely that in this region we're going to trade democracy for security, at least for the short term?
I cannot imagine that sort of deal to be acceptable to, in any case, the vast majority of European countries. The question that I rather ask myself is, and it's linked obviously to my work with the OSCE, I mean, the whole raison d'etre of the development of the OSCE was to develop a security structure, as one always says, from Vancouver to Vladivostok, that allows for some kind of engagement with the Russian Federation. And obviously, this dialogue was maintained under periods when Russia was or the Soviet Union, its predecessor, was very far from being a democracy, and we don't know. I mean, I listened to the fascinating discussion we had earlier on the future of Russia, in which direction it is going now. But I think that nonetheless, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is what needs to happen? What needs to happen in Ukraine? What needs to happen in Europe so that we can have some sort of meaningful interaction with the Russians after the dust, as everybody has settled in this process as well. And
I guess perhaps the first question to ask is what needs to happen in Russia so that we can engage with it.
Yes, but I mean, as I said, the question is not an absolute question, because I mean, the OSCE and the CSE, which preceded it, started out under circumstances when the place was not a democracy either. And I mean, the chances of Russia turning into a democracy of the type that we have experienced, should I say, I mean, this is a very complex perspective, I mean, to put it very carefully. But what I'm saying is, right now, I mean, it is clear that even the OSCE cannot serve that purpose that it was created for historically. But if we look at security perspectives in Europe in the medium and long term, this is an important question that we need to answer.
Thank you, and I'm sure there are other questions in the room, or at least I expect that we have started many fronts of discussion that might be continued. So if there are any, if anyone wants to ask a question or to make a comment, please definitely do so. Oh, sure.
I don't know if the host can ask questions.
I think we can make an exception.
Can you make an exception? Thank you. What happens to Moldova if Mayr Sandu can't keep her position and her government can't keep her position? We've seen some protests. Of course, they've been kind of motivated by certain players in the country that have sympathies towards Moscow. But how do you see that in Moldova's position amid the war in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's me. Just to answer the question. I think, again, building on what I said about poverty that helps Russia so much push its agenda and mobilize people who are otherwise not pro-Russian, but mobilize them under the flags of the allegedly pro-Russian parties. I think Moldova's greatest challenge long-term is and will be ensuring a genuine pluralism in Moldova. I think that Moldova's future and securing Moldova's European future is, at this point, about making sure that people who think and people who feel pro-European have a genuine choice, have a pluralistic choice, and by ensuring that choice, you also eliminate the completely artificial pro-EU versus pro-Russia choice. Again, completely artificial in Moldova because it's being fueled by forces who want to split Moldova and always make any election, any parliamentary election in Moldova an existential question, East or West. I think it's a completely false narrative that's being utilized by those who wish to keep Moldova in this uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions? Or else, the one thing that I would like to ask all of you, because I think it might be a pretty complicated question, is we are talking about regional security cooperation, whether in NATO, whether in the EU, or in any other format. But we have clear differences in this region, inside NATO and EU borders and outside NATO and EU borders. I mean, we have Hungary that has a completely different position than the rest of the EU. We have our host country, Serbia, that positions itself completely differently from EU countries, although it is aspiring to be an EU member, at least declaratively. Is there any way that we can break this deadlock? What are the perspectives of actually forging a security consensus here? Or perhaps it just cannot be done. Maybe the trade-offs are just too much.
Mm-hmm. May I just bring one more element to this conversation? And I know we will have a discussion on enlargement later on, but I think we should really look at the European political community as maybe an avenue of, at least, if not as an institution, because it's not going to be an institution with, secretariats and so on, but it's I think it's a new political forum where the questions of the European security architecture can be tackled without Russia sitting at the table, because this is the basic characteristic of the EPC. And the EPC being the avenue also for those countries who aspire to become EU members to have substantial conversations about EU security while they're still outside of the Union. And I think this is something we should be watching. The next meeting of the EPC is going to take place in Moldova. And I think this is a great sign also, and a recognition for the strategic importance of Moldova succeeding. But also it's going to include the UK. We haven't mentioned UK, but the UK has been a very significant player in the Black Sea, also in military terms. And it can obviously include, it does include Central Asia and Turkey and so on. So all of a sudden the European continent has maybe just a new place to discuss its security architecture, and I think we should, even if some of us are skeptical, we should still watch it as an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I will try to say that be it consensus or unanimity, NATO or EU, we achieved important decisions this year, at least in the 8 months since 24th of February. So we are talking indeed about unity. You mentioned a couple of allies or member states and also partners in trying to get the consensus in relation with the security at the regional European level. So I think we are on a good path. Moreover, I would like to say in this framework that there are a couple of regional formats that we need to revive. One is the Southeastern Defense Ministerial. Currently, Bulgaria is holding the presidency. Romania is going to hold this presidency for 2 years, starting with mid-summer 2023. Also, we will agree in this region that Western Balkans are still a very fragile region, and we need to assume more responsibility and commitment, and look in this way to Bosnia-Herzegovina, to EUFOR Althea, look to NATO K4, and look to all this network of missions, operations, regional formats, and I think there is place to do more together towards reaching a common understanding, at least, of the risk threats to our security, regionally speaking.
Thank you very much. We're already past the end of our panel, so just please make it really short.
Right, two sentences. by the way of reviving certain organizational or regional organizations or structures, we seem to forget that there is one which is called Black Sea Economic Cooperation, the BSEC, which was, surprise, surprise, initiated by Turkey, and which is, well, is there. It has everything that an organization needs. It has a bank, it has parliamentary assembly, it has a summit that makes decisions, everything, and it is over-institutionalized and totally ineffective. But it is there. Mm-hmm. And in addition, we just need to keep that in mind. Of course, it is by sheer coincidence I raise this issue right now, then the Director General of the organization is a former Romanian foreign minister. No connection. Now, the second point is Russia will go nowhere, whether it will change or not. Neither will Turkey go anywhere. They will stay both. So we need also to think what we want our relationship be with them in the future.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think the first step towards a security cooperation is a shared risk assessment. And I think in this context, we have made relatively big steps forward. And I mean, I'm not speaking of Sweden and Finland. I mean, even in more sort of traditional neutral countries like my own home country, which is tripling its defense expenditure, and Switzerland, you have a completely new discussion about European risks. I also think, to come back to this earlier point you made, that the decision that was taken with regard to the candidate status of Ukraine and Moldova was quite exceptional. I spent 4 years in the European Union managing a descent where member states were not able to agree that these countries have a perspective that they can share around. And then within 3 months, you got to a process that took 3 years and hasn't got that far in the case of the Western Balkans. And I think that obviously the logic is that this logic has to be taken forward also in the Western Balkans. Right now, what has happened is that the situation has strengthened NATO. But we do not know in the longer term where the Americans will be on this. And clearly it opens up questions for the future of European security, which will need to be answered. And I think we've done the first step, and the next steps will need to be taken.
Thank you. Many thanks to the speakers. I think we have all earned our lunch, and many thanks to you for having that patience. I think this is the time to say bon appétit.
Right.